I want to talk about building bots for Microsoft Teams because it can be a bit confusing if you're coming to it for the first time. There's two different tools that Microsoft promote for building bots in Microsoft Teams. There's the bot framework and there's also Power Virtual Agents. So how do they work? What are the pros and cons between them? And which ones should you use when? I'm going to compare both of them and then talk about which one you'd use when at the end. So let's talk first about bot framework. Bot framework has certainly been around longer, and it's something that is not just for Microsoft Teams, and not even just for kind of Microsoft 365. It's come out of Azure, and it's a methodology, if you like, for building bots across all sorts of different platforms. The way it works is that you build your bot against the bot framework SDK, and that kind of handles the interaction that you have with this bot. And that's where you write your code against. And then when you're finished doing that, you then literally enable it for the different services or channels that you want your bot to appear on. So that might be Skype for Business, might be Microsoft Teams, could also be Twilio, could be Slack, could be via email, embedded in a web page. There's lots and lots of different ways you can expose the functionality of your bot, but crucially you don't have to write any more code in order to make that happen. The bot framework handles the challenging kind of intricacies of communication with all these various different platforms. It's an API driven model, so your code kind of responds and works with the bot framework via an API call. So literally every time a user interacts with your bot and sends your bot a message, that goes to bot framework. Bot framework then calls your API endpoint that you've given it and said, hey, this user's just said something. Your code can consume that, decide what the answer should be to that user, send it back to the bot framework, and bot framework will ensure it's then delivered to the user in whichever channel they happen to be using your bot on. It's a really nice model that takes developers away from having to understand how all these different endpoints operate. A really nice example of that, I had written a bot for presence in Microsoft Teams. So it was a bot that you could chat with inside Microsoft Teams or embedded on a web page, and it would give me my current Microsoft Teams presence. So busy, available, away, whatever. Recently, Microsoft announced support for Google Home and Amazon Alexa, and those have shown up just as channels inside the bot framework. What that meant was I could go and take my old bot code that I'd written for Microsoft Teams, click some buttons, step through the Alexa developer setup, and without changing any of my bot code, I could have that same bot work through Amazon Alexa devices. So now I can just talk to my devices and find out what my Teams presence is. Less useful for me because I know what my Teams presence is. Super useful for the rest of my family right now when I'm working at home. They can find out what my Teams presence is, whether or not I'm in a call or not, whether I'm do not disturb, or whether I'm like free to kind of run some errands or just kind of answer some questions. So really nice model there. So bot framework's been around for quite a long time. I have been talking about it using an example for building a bot to get the weather. A weather bot is a really nice example to use because everybody understands what a weather bot should do, right? It just goes and gets the weather for a particular place and tells you what it is. And that's not super useful for many organizations, but the concept is, because really all the weatherbot is doing is calling an API and getting back a result, and that is super useful for lots and lots of different use cases inside an organization. So I tend to use a weatherbot as a good demo example. Back in 2017, I started talking about building a weatherbot using bot framework. And I used to do this session, it was 60 minutes long, and I would build a bot from scratch in that session in code. It was pretty terrifying for me because there wasn't a lot of room for making mistakes and it was writing live code on screen. It was probably pretty boring as well because I didn't really have the time to kind of dig into the whys and the wherefores. I just had to go straight in with the code and be building this bot. And it would take the full 60 minutes to build this bot. You can see in the picture actually, I had to bring my own keyboard to these sessions because there was that much typing to do. Let's fast forward a year to 2018. And that same weatherbot only took 30 minutes to build, down from 60 minutes. So what's changed? Well, during that time, Azure Bot Service was launched, and this made it so much easier to get started with writing your first bot. I'm going to show you a demo in a minute of exactly how easy that is, but it meant that I could go straight into a templated working bot example and then modify that example for my weather bot. And that really cut down the amount of effort needed into a 30-minute session. But I still got a lot of feedback. There was a lot of code to write still. And I was going around telling people you didn't need to be a developer to write these bots. And people were saying, that's great, but there's still quite a lot of code. I still feel like I'm a bit out of my depth if I'm not a pro developer in this space. So fast forward another year, and what do we have now? Well, we have the Bot Framework Composer. And that's a really nice user interface for building bots, and really does mean you don't have to be a developer to do this stuff. So I'm going to show you a demo, first of all, of the Azure bot service, but I want to tell you that the Bot Framework Composer is coming, because if you're not a developer, I don't want you to turn off right now. So let's have a demo of the Azure bot service, which is a nice way that you can go to Azure and start building your first bot. So I want to show you how easy it is to build a new bot using the Azure bot service. So I'm in my Microsoft Azure tenant right now. I've created an empty resource group just for this demo, so you can kind of see there's nothing else here, and we're going to start from scratch. And the first thing we're going to do is just add a new resource, and it's going to be a web app bot. So that's the thing to search for, is web app bot. And we'll create one of those, and we'll give it a name. And just check the other things. So location, it obviously up to you. Pricing tier, so there is a free tier, the F0, so that's free for 10,000 messages, I think a month. So I'm going to choose that one. And what's really interesting and worth checking out are the templates. So there's a number of different templates here that you could use, and depending on the different languages as well. So you could do it in Node, you could do it in C#, and a couple of different options as well. So I'm going to choose the Echo bot. It's a very simple bot that just gives you back whatever message you send it. It sends it right back to you. But it's a really good way of kind of getting your first bot up and running, and it gives you a good jumping off point to then iterate and change things later. So click OK there, make sure that's selected. I'm going to turn off App Insights. The only reason for doing that is to make it a little bit faster to create, so we're not waiting around whilst it creates all the bits and pieces. If you're creating an actual bot, I would definitely keep App Insights on. It's really useful. So I'm going to click Create. It's going to go through the validation process, and in a minute start creating the bot. And I'm just going to make sure that's okay, and then we just have to wait for the bot to be created. It can take a couple of minutes. You'll see up in the you can't see because I'm in the way up here. Let's move me out of the way. You can see where it says deployment in progress, and there's a notification as well. So as soon as it's finished, you'll see this light up. So this is the thing to watch for up here. The notification bell will stop doing the kind of animation, and will pop up with a message when things are ready. So I'm just going to fast forward this recording so you don't have to wait. Okay, so now you can see deployment succeeded, and I can go straight to that resource. And this is the new instance I've created of the web app bot. So a couple of things to look at here. So right in front of you on the screen is a kind of like a pipeline, if you like, of things, a workflow, if you like, for things that you need to do. So if you've never done any of this before, it's got some good pointers for things you might want to go and try. So testing locally with the emulator, how to publish, how to connect to different channels, how to use analytics to evaluate your bot's process. And right now we're at this build phase. So a couple of things you can do. First thing I like to do is this one on the left hand side here under bot management that says test in web chat. So this is a way of just talking to your bot without having to deploy any code, not using any of the different channels. It just gives you a place to have a conversation with your bot. So you can just say hello, and it's just going to echo back whatever it is you tell it. It's going to send it right back on the screen. So what does this tell you? Well, it tells you that you've deployed a fully working bot, even though it's not particularly useful, but everything is kind of up and running running properly, connected together, configured. This bot is working and ready to go. Now, if you wanted to, at this point, you could actually enable this bot for different channels. So if you go to channels under bot management, here you can see all the different channels and places that you can make this bot available. So for instance, if I want to make it available in Microsoft Teams, I just click that button and click save. And there's a terms of service around publishing services to Microsoft Teams. And once I've done that, then that bot is then available to be used in Microsoft Teams. Now, I still would need to package that inside a Teams application if I wanted to. There is a quicker way of testing actually. I can actually, if I wanted to, click this link. This is actually a Teams link to a direct chat with the bot. So it's not recommended to do this as a publication or production method, but it's a good way of testing, quickly getting a conversation going with the bot in Microsoft Teams. So you really want to package it properly into an application, but if you just want to try it out in Microsoft Teams, that's a kind of a good way of going. So we've tested our bot and we've seen how to enable it for different channels. But what about the code? Where is the code that makes this bot? So if I go to the build tab, I've got a couple of different options. So I can download the source code for this bot directly in as a Visual Studio project. And then I can look at it locally, and I can then use the local emulator as well to kind of build my bot out when I'm ready. It also comes with the publish settings, so I can publish it right back into this environment and get going again. The other thing I can do actually, if I'm making quick changes, is use the online code editor. So if I click online code editor here, it's going to open in a browser a code editor that I can use. And this is a really nice way of, if you don't have Visual Studio installed or you're waiting for it to install, actually you can just look at the code here and you can see everything that's going on. And even if you're not familiar with this code, because there's quite a lot of code here, this is the EchoBot sample. So I can look inside under bots, under EchoBot, and you can sort of see this, there's a function here called onMessageActivity, and you can see it's building up a reply text with the echo and then the turn context activity text. So you don't have to know anything about bot framework code to kind of see that, okay, well, this is building up the reply text by putting echo in front of it and then sending back whatever was sent, and then you've got this send activity that takes that reply text and puts it back in. So you can understand what this code is doing. And if you are building out this as a new bot, you probably want to get rid of this echo stuff because that's not what you want your bot to do. But now you understand that this is where you go. This is the bit that you change. This is where you put your logic in, your business logic, your flows for whatever it is you need to do to make this into your working bot. There's also a on members added async. So you can see this hello and welcome here. And then for each member that gets added, you can see it's just saying like a welcome text here. So you've got two entry points here. You've got members added, so every time a user opens your bot for the first time, you can do something. And then also in response to every message, you can also do something here as well. So this is a really nice way of getting started because you've got everything here. This is a fully working bot that you could deploy out to multiple channels and put in multiple places. It is ready to go. And then also you've got a jumping off point here for building this bot out into whatever it is you need it to do. Okay, so that's the Azure bot service, but I said there was going to be something for non-developers and people who aren't comfortable jumping straight in and writing code. So what does that look like? Well, at Microsoft Ignite 2019, Microsoft announced the Bot Framework Composer. What's that about? Well, it's a user interface for writing bots and gives you a like a whiteboard on which you can drag and drop composable parts in order to build up a working bot. That means you don't have to have any understanding of what the code does under the hood. There's a nice emulator you can use to test with it, but crucially it's writing real bot framework code, so you can drop into that code whenever you want to kind of look at it and learn from it. So it's a really nice learning tool as well. I find the Bot Framework Composer a really nice way of designing new bots with people, either for a proof of concept or to get a good design out, because you can sit down with a designer alongside a developer and really understand what that bot is doing, because you can see it all on the screen. So you can download the Bot Framework Composer. It's free. The link is on the screen right now. And I'm going to show you a demo of what it would look like to build a weather bot using the Bot Framework Composer. So this is the Bot Framework Composer, and this is my weather bot realized kind of inside the Bot Framework Composer. Some of these things that you see on the screen have actually come kind of for free when you first create your Bot Framework Composer project. So for instance, this greeting flow that's happening here, I didn't write this. I think I wrote this bit in here, but it kind of comes for you as you can see what it's doing, which is quite nice. So it's a loop for each item in the members added. So really every time a user interacts with your bot for the first time, it's going to say, whatever you want it to say. And in this case, I'm just saying, hi, you can ask me about the weather. So this is the whole kind of greeting flow that happens. I've created my own one for the weather. I could have used Lewis to sort of, as the user said things, evaluate which of the different flows to send them down. I decided not to do that for this demo. I'm just using a trigger phrase. So what that means is really the user just has to type in exactly this phrase in order to kick off this flow. So it's not ideal, but for a demo, it's quite good. It's a lot easier, than sort of getting into all the Lewis stuff. If you're building a real bot, maybe do this first, and then you could add the Lewis stuff on later. Entirely up to you. And then after this, I'm just kind of dragging on these composable parts to build up what I need to do. So I need to first of all ask the user where they want the weather for. Then I need to go and get the weather by calling an API and then present the results onto the screen. So the first thing I do is just ask for some information. I did this by clicking the add button here and just choosing off this menu of items. So I can ask a question and I get some options now for whether it's text, whether it's multiple choice, file attachment. I can even ask for an OAuth login as well to prompt the user to log in. So I'm just asking for, I'm just saying where for. And then here you can see this user input section. I'm putting the value that the user gave me into a variable. So this property called dialog.location, and that's because I need to use it later when I make my API call. Making the API call is really, really simple. Again, it's just a case of going down to access external resources and send an HTTP request. That's the one I'm doing here. It's an HTTP GET, and I'm just putting in let me try and find it, inside the URL, the location, just by using the curly braces, just putting in that property there. And again, when I get the result of that API call, I'm going to put it in its own property as well, dialog.weatherdata. I'm doing some simple checking to make sure that the status code was a 200 and not some error. And I'm just using a simple kind of send a response message back. Other than that, I'm then taking the weather from the content of the HTTP call and then crafting a response by just poking in like this nice sentence and then putting in the bits that I need from the result from the HTTP call. So a really simple process of gathering some data from the user, making an API call, sending the result set back. At any point in time, I can test what I'm doing here by clicking the Test in Emulator button. When I do that, it's going to open the Bot Framework emulator, and it's going to put me straight into the kind of flow, and you can see I get this greeting message that I spoke about. Now, because I was using keywords, I can kick off my weather flow just by saying weather. The bot is going to say where for, so come over here, that's this bit here, where it says where for. I'm going to put in a location. It's going to make that API call, come back, assuming everything is okay, send back this response, and you can see how it's inserted the values from the API call to make a nice sentence to tell me exactly what the weather's going to be. Really simple example, but kind of shows how useful the bot framework can be for visualizing how a bot works and quickly building up flows of data and user activity, and then being able to quickly test it locally to my machine. So it's worth noting I didn't deploy this. I could instantly see changes. So if I wanted to maybe change this bit here that says where for, I could put in where shall I get the weather for instance. A very simple change. Click restart bot, and you can see I don't need to redeploy this anywhere. I can then click test in emulator again. It's going to launch the emulator, and
instantly I see my changes reflected there. So makes it much nicer for local development as well. I can very quickly iterate things and try things out.
So that's the Bot Framework Composer. It's a really nice way of building bot framework bots. It's a really good way of learning, if you've never built bot framework bots before, learning how it all hangs together, how some of those more complicated things like OAuth and calling external APIs maybe, how that all works and hangs together. And it integrates really nicely with Microsoft Cognitive Services, so there's great integration for Lewis, language understanding, which I didn't really cover in the demo, just because it's a whole tool by itself. So you should definitely go check out the Bot Framework Composer if any of that sounds interesting. Okay, so I said at the top of this talk, there were two different ways Microsoft were promoting building bots in Microsoft Teams, or for Microsoft Teams on the Microsoft stack. And the other one is Power Virtual Agents. So what are they? Well, they were also announced at Microsoft Ignite 2019. They are also a user kind of a UI for building bots by dragging composable parts onto a whiteboard. So I can see how it gets really confusing. They're part of the Power Platform, so they are separate from Bot Framework. They are part of the Power Platform. They're pitched really as a no-code solution to building bots. So they are designed much more like a black box that you don't look inside. You build up these bots and then you kind of run with them. They're not really meant for customization and tinkering. For me, their superpower is that they can directly execute Power Automate flows. So if you're an organization that has lots of Power Automate flows, this is a really nice way of gathering the information those flows need to operate and getting that user feedback and sort of enabling users to interact with those flows. You can publish to Microsoft Teams from Power Automate. You can also publish to Skype if you need to via the Azure Bot Service, which is interesting because that's the underlying part of the bot framework, the Azure Bot Service, and it speaks to some of the integrations that I'm going to talk about in a minute. It's important to point out Power Virtual Agents are licensed per tenant, so if you want to use them, there is a license to use them. The costs are on the screen, they're correct at the time of recording. The Bot Framework Composer, by comparison, is free in quotes, but it's important to understand what that means. So it's free to write the code, but it then publishes to Azure, and then you're responsible for those Azure hosting and running costs. Also, with Power Virtual Agents, there is a way of using Power Virtual Agents in Teams that doesn't require a license. So it can be used with your existing Teams license. You can go and get the Power Virtual Agents app in the Teams store and download it. And from there, you can write Power Virtual Agent bots that work inside Teams. That's really meant for sort of system developers and SME subject matter experts to create very targeted bots for common scenarios, and it ships with a load of templates and kind of common scenarios as well to help you get there. So it's very good for kind of collecting data, and it's got support in there for things like conditions and looping and all the rest of it. Big gotcha, you can't execute Power Automate flows from within those Power Virtual Agents that are in Teams. You can, but you need the full license to do that. So whilst it's free to use it inside Teams, if you want to execute flows, you do still need that license. So let's look at what it would take to build a weather bot using Power Virtual Agents. Okay, so let's look at what it would take to create a weather bot using Power Virtual Agents. So if you come and go to Power Virtual Agents and go and create a new bot, there's actually a load of existing topics that you can use as templates. So depending on your particular business requirement, you may find that actually all this stuff is there for you already. So whether it's a gift card policy, reminders, managing an account, using coupons, store pickup stuff, like there's a lot of interesting topics already there. Unfortunately, there isn't one for the weather, but that's okay because that's what we're here to make. So I can go and create a new topic instead. And when I do that, I need to give it some trigger phrases, so things like show me the weather and what's the weather, and I'm going to follow very much the same flow that I did with Bot Framework, which is asking the question and then going and calling the API to get the answer. The only difference is I'm going to use a Power Automate flow to actually go and do the work of calling the API and processing the data. So it's very similar to Power
to Bot Framework, very similar to Bot Framework Composer in that I kind of create these boxes of things that I need it to do. So asking a question is the first one, and I can actually, what I find really nice actually is rather than just asking the user for a text, I can actually say what I'm expecting back as a city, and then the Power Virtual Agents kind of engine will make sure that what the user puts in is actually a city. It will validate it against known cities. So that's really nice. It's a really powerful validation technique. I'm going to send the message back to the user just to say, hey, I'm getting a weather, and then I'm going to call an action. So this is how I go and interact with Power Automate Flow. Just by kind of doing that, I can go and create a new one, or I've got an existing one. So you can see here I've got an existing one that says, get weather and return it to Power Virtual Agents. That's the one obviously I'm going to choose. If we go and look at that flow and see what it does, actually it's really simple. So when you go and click the create a flow button here to create a new one, it's going to top and tail with these two actions to bring in the information, the parameters from Power Virtual Agents that were prompted for. So here you can see city, and then there's also, it ends with a return value to Power Virtual Agents. This is how you send back the information back to your bot. In the middle, I'm doing exactly the same thing that I did in Bot Framework, but just using the Power Automate Flow sort of syntax and way of doing things with our HTTP action and then a parse JSON action. And then this is the response that I'm sending back to Power Virtual Agents to say, the weather in this city is this degrees. So really, really similar. This is a kind of much more of a low or no code really solution to the same problem. And then you can see here on the right hand side, this is the flow that you'd expect. This is the conversation that you're going to have with the user. It's exactly the same actually. The user experience is exactly the same, and that's the whole point. It doesn't matter whether you do this weatherbot in this instance, but whatever it is you're creating, it doesn't matter whether you're building it in Bot Framework or Power Virtual Agents. The experience is often very, very similar. So you can see here for the user experience, it's exactly the same as for Bot Framework. It's asking for the weather and then bringing it back and giving it back to the user.
Okay, so we've done a high-level overview of what the Bot Framework is and how it works with Azure Bot Service, and what Power Virtual Agents are and how they work. And we've seen demos of both. So, which one should you use? Well, like any good kind of comparison, the answer is it depends. It depends what type of application you're building, what the use case is, who you are, and what your users are. So things to consider. Who's going to be building this? If it's citizen developers, people with no or very little development experience, and they might not have the time to invest in learning how something like the Bot Framework works and hangs together, Power Virtual Agents might be an excellent way of quickly putting stuff together without having a lot of that deep understanding of how bots work. Similarly, if it's a proof of concept or a spike, Power Virtual Agents might be a really good way of getting to 80% really quickly without needing to spend loads and loads of time building out all the things necessary for a proper development project. Ongoing cost is absolutely a consideration. Power Virtual Agents has a licensing cost. Bot Framework has a kind of a lower, probably overall cost, but there is all that development effort you need to consider as well. And then you should also think about extensibility and long-term maintenance. It very much comes down to the speed of execution versus the control. And the answer is going to depend on who you are, whether you're a developer, whether you want to stay away from the development side, how much time you have, what your skill set is. The Bot Framework Composer kind of lies nicely in the middle with some of that, because it's a really good way of helping developers and the business work together to understand what's needed and how best to deliver it. So I really like how the Bot Framework Composer allows developers to sit in the Bot Framework space, but also visualize what the bot is doing to the rest of the business and those subject matter experts, so they can see the impacts and the effects that the bot is going to do and the workflow without needing to understand the code. And one really interesting point around all of this is I've been talking about which one should you use when. Actually, there's lots of places where you could use both. So both these models are based on the adaptive dialogue, and both models use skills. So if you don't know what those are, a skill allows you, it's like a composable piece of functionality, a reusable piece of functionality inside of a Bot Framework bot. So let's say, I don't know, your IT team might create a bot framework bot that helps you integrate with your IT ticketing system, right? So that's what that bot helps integrate with the ticketing system, create ticket, get an update on the ticket, close the ticket, whatever. They could write that as a bot framework skill. Now they could go ahead and also write it as a full bot if that was what they wanted to do, but they might just want to write it as a skill and have that functionality show up in different places. What that means is you can reuse that skill in lots of different bots anywhere you need to interact with the IT ticketing system. So that's quite powerful by itself. What's super powerful is that citizen developers or SMEs writing bots in Power Virtual Agents, the ones that are executing flows, they can also call those bot framework skills that have been packaged up. So you can have a development team inside your organization using bot framework because that's where they're most happy with the control and the language and the sort of pro development SDKs that they are using to build what they need to build, that kind of rich functionality that's very specific to your organization. They can wrap it in a skill. But then citizen developers, subject matter experts, non-developers can execute those from within Power Virtual Agents. So that's really, really powerful. So really, it's not about Bot Framework Composer versus Power Virtual Agents. It's about using whichever one makes sense depending on your situation. It is very much possible to create solutions that combine both and give you the best of both worlds. There's a bit of crossover there as well between them, and it'll be interesting as well in the future to see whether there's greater interaction between the two and deeper kind of integration between them. But there's two different approaches to building bots for Microsoft Teams, and it's up to you whether you want that kind of complete SaaS offering of Power Virtual Agents, which is great kind of for all sorts of people and all sorts of use cases, or whether you need the kind of libraries, the control, the SDKs, the performance of bot framework, which is kind of much more aimed at kind of developer community. Lots and lots of different tools to help you get started, whichever road you go down. Links are on the screen, and I'll put all the actual links in the notes as well for this video. Thanks very much for watching.